Warpugs, you need a good villain. You need a good villain. And today we have one. Luthor Harkon. And by the title of this video, the insane vampire pirate admiral emperor arch commodore of the Vampire Coast. Now, anytime that you have a character introduced like this, you already know it's going to be serious. But luckily, we have PancreasNoWorks to put everything out in context for us. And that's what I'm here for. Guys, it's Warhammer Fantasy. It's good times. It's most likely war crimes. It is going to be war crimes. It's the Vampire Coast. What else is it going to be but a war crime? You in shot? Thank you. Warpugs, all of PancreasNoWorks links are going to be in the description below. Be sure to check him out. I really need to upgrade my computer to get myself Warhammer 3 and play it all of 15 minutes a day. One round? Yeah, that sounds about fair. Let's go.
Has there ever been a single person who hasn't at least briefly dreamed about what it'd be like to be a pirate? I mean, come on now. I can't be the only one who watched Pirates of the Caribbean as a kid and thought, man, that looks so cool. I wish I could do that.
As a kid. God, I'm old.
Swinging down from the mast to duel other pirates or a corrupt official, boarding enemy ships and looting all that sweet plunder. God, I miss Pirates of the Caribbean Online. That was such a fun game. But then you learn about what pirates really lived like, with scurvy and constantly being on the run and probably being shot on sight at almost every port you could have gone to.
Yep.
Not exactly a glamorous lifestyle. But
Nope.
The dream still lives on in fiction even to this day. To some extent, we romanticize what it's like to be a pirate. You can do what you want because a pirate lives free, after all. But what if you weren't just a pirate? What if, in the ultimate middle school notebook doodle come to life, you were an insane vampire necromancer pirate who sailed the seven seas, fought Aztec lizards riding dinosaurs, and can use the power of the ocean itself to drown your foes? Assuming...
You know what? That's probably the best intro for a character I've heard in a very, very long time.
Of course, the 500 cannons you brought to the battlefield weren't good enough on their own. That dream may not be something you and I can ever achieve, but for Luthor Harkon, that's everyday life. So get ready to set sail, because today we're talking about one of the silliest, most entertaining Warhammer characters to ever exist.
Let's go.
What a fun guy. Luthor Harkon's origin is something that even he doesn't know. One of his origin stories is that he was once a man named Luthor of the Harkoni tribe. They were a tribe of humans who lived near Nehekara, specifically Lamia, which is important for vampire reasons. It's said that Luthor managed to rise to quite the prominent position, becoming the head of the city's harbor guard under the command of none other than Avarash himself. Aside from the fact his name is basically the same, I mean Luthor is just Luthor with the H-O taken out, Lamia is where all the vampire nonsense started in Warhammer Fantasy. Incidentally, if this origin is true, it means that Luthor is not only a vampire, but one of the first and potentially a blood dragon given his subordinate status to Avarash. In this version, he traveled with Avarash for a while and likely helped defend Lamia when the living besieged it, but beyond that, there really isn't too much to say on the matter. Of course, there's also the possibility that he was originally a mortal necromancer from the eastern portions of the Empire. This also tracks in a few different ways, chiefly among them being the fact that on the Vampire Coast where he's most prominent, there's a city called New Beckefin. Beckefin is a city from Ostermark where theoretically Luthor once resided as a mortal. Also as evidence is the fact that the eastern portions of the Empire are where the Undead usually cause problems for Sigmar's realm, and the fact that Luthor himself doesn't sound much like an Ehekaran when he speaks. Granted, he doesn't sound that much like an Imperial citizen either, he sounds like every pirate ever, but he certainly doesn't have the same speech patterns as Tomb King's characters. But who knows, maybe he's just a weeaboo for the Empire of Man. I get it. His true origin almost doesn't matter though either way, since he doesn't really remember his mortal life and only knows that one night he was born anew. He's never tried to dig into who he once was or go back home, so I'm just gonna take a stance and say that if Luthor Harkon doesn't care about his origin, we shouldn't either. He also doesn't exhibit...
That's always a very good stance to take. I really want Warhammer 3, but I want to be able to play it on this PC, which I can't do. Guys, the war crime cat is bothering me. 1 second. I pet you, but it seems to never matter. Will you go away now? Yes, I'm petting you. Scratching me behind the ears. Come here. You want to be on the camera? Do you want to be on the camera? Yes? No? Maybe? Fine.
Any bloodline traits, further proving that his backstory is kind of irrelevant. Depending on which one you believe, though, we either cut ahead a good 100 or a few thousand years to the year 876 IC. The scene, an Imperial merchant ship sailing around doing its thing. Unfortunately for this ship, it was attacked by Norscan raiders who do what they do best and slaughter everyone aboard so they can loot it for profit and glory in the name of the Dark Gods. Much more fortunately, however, at least for us, was the fact that this ship contained Luthor Harkon's coffin aboard it. He was escaping from witch hunters and smuggled himself aboard this ship out of Marienburg. The Norscans saw that it was something valuable looking and took it with them on their journey, which for was one reason or another taking them towards the lands of Lustria. If you've seen part 3 of JoJo, it's honestly just the beginning of that, because Luthor eventually awoke from his coffin, having either gotten himself out or been rudely interrupted by the Norscans, and by the time he reached Lustria, the entire crew had been turned into his undead puppets and minions. Now normally, this would be the end of the story. I mean, sure, the specifics are a bit unique, but a vampire waking up and zombifying a whole bunch of people is nothing new in Warhammer.
Not
in
really.
Sterling, that's called Tuesday. But despite what would eventually happen to him, Luthor Harkon is apparently the luckiest bastard in all of Warhammer short of Caiaphas Cain. Because the exact spot he ended up staking his claim in Lustria, what would become known as the Vampire Coast because of his shenanigans, was geographically perfect for his needs.
Yay!
The Great Ocean, aka the Atlantic Ocean but with a donut in it, has ocean currents and whatnot like all oceans do. Stay with me on this 5th grade geography lesson, I promise it's important. Even
Okay.
in our own world, sailing when we only had wooden ships.
I swear to God, I looked at the edge of the Vampire Coast where Brazil is, and the first thing I saw was Jungle of Weeds. I'm sorry, I am what I am.
Was oftentimes more art than science. Add in the fact this is Warhammer and doing literally anything has a significant fatality rate, and you get a whole lot of dead sailors and shipwrecked vessels.
Yep.
The Vampire Coast region of Lustria not only is incredibly hard to navigate safely, but ocean currents also bring an inordinate amount of these wrecks and bodies directly towards it. Luthor Harkon, through sheer accidental circumstances, landed on the one site in Lustria, maybe the whole planet, where bodies will just come to him. So
Yay!
because he washed ashore on the mother of all corpse deposits that refills itself, he just developed his undead army without really needing to put real effort into it. Oh sure, he put effort in raising the dead, you have to do that, but most necromancers and vampires need to either quietly dig through crypts and graveyards or kill a whole lot of people first before they get their army. Not Luthor. He just waits for the next batch of unlucky souls to drown, and when they wash up, he gets free zombies.
Yay!
Every now and then, because he is also a pirate, remember, he expedites the process a little bit by sinking the ships that come too close. That's actually where the name comes from. High Elven sailors named the area the Vampire Coast, both because of Luthor Harkon and because of the general undead spooky vibes it gives off. Sirens wailing and bringing sailors to their doom, mist blocking people's sight and forcing them aground where the undead wait to bring them into watery graves. Really, even if natural ocean currents didn't do you in already, going near the Vampire Coast is a great way to get yourself killed. He even went through the effort of clearing away the jungle at the point where 5 smaller rivers meet the sea to give the illusion of a safe haven for ships to temporarily ground themselves at. It's an
And that is a dick move.
illusion because the moment they land, they find out each of them has both a fort waiting to gun them down, as well as swamp monsters that are just there because Lustria is a miniature Catacan. Now guaranteed to have a military for basically eternity, Luthor Harkon decided some empire building would suit him quite nicely. He based it off the Empire of Man, naturally, giving us another point in favor of him originally being from the Empire. Of course,
Okay.
to run an empire, you need slightly more than undead zombies. Zombies are all well and good for the army, and Luthor's are even just a little bit smarter than the normal zombies of Warhammer, but you need someone who can count to at least 100 to run things at a governmental level. So he divided his realm into 6 districts, one based on each of those 5 rivers, and the 6th and main one based around New Beckafin in the area known as the Blood Swamps. Each of them is run by a trusted vampire or ghoul, with trusted meaning they know full well that if they betray Luthor, they're going to explode. He crowned himself emperor, made a throne out of bones held up by zombies, and then decided he was going to be a pain in the ass of the Lizardmen for all time.
There you
Sometimes
go.
instead of emperor, he just calls himself the Pirate King or Arch Grand Commodore or something equally goofy, but he's in charge, and the name is just a way of flaunting his ego. And this is where he overstepped his bounds just a little bit too much. He and his forces discovered the city of Huatl, an abandoned lizardman city that Luthor felt had something in it that would make him even stronger. After about 3 weeks, he found a sealed chamber in pristine condition covered in magical glyphs, and was only slightly deterred by the fact that every zombie he sent in there almost instantly withered into nothing as it drained the magical energies keeping them alive. Making the faulty assumption that he was just built better than that, Luthor used his own dark magic to try and deal with the chamber's glyphs. But if you know anything about the Lizardmen, you know that for all that Luthor Harkon is a fun and lovable rogue, he's not quite at the pay grade of sorcerers the Lizardmen usually have to deal with.
Right.
Kairos Fate Weaver is the minimum to successfully be dealing with Lizardmen magic, and Luthor is no Lord of Change. The room started collapsing around him, and he realized the glyphs were not only absorbing the magic he threw at them, but his very life essence as well. Barely escaping with his unlife, Luthor Harkon emerged from Huatl a broken man. Quite literally, actually. His mind shattered into a dozen different personalities, because the Lizardmen could apparently induce multiple personality disorder. At all times, they're battling for control over his mind, and if none of them are dominant, he just stands there motionless until one of them does gain control.
That tends to lead to a couple of problems, like specifically doing basic tasks.
He was at one point playable on the tabletop, and that was actually part of his rules. I believe it was if you rolled a 1 through a 3, he gained the Stupidity special rule. This also gave him a very curious condition on top of being the main character from the movie Split. The winds of magic cease to be able to connect to him. In fact, he's almost a blank. Magic ceases to work around him, and he's resistant to any spells people try to cast on him. Aside from being able to reanimate and control the undead, there's no blasting spells for Luthor Harkon. If you thought that would put a damper on his plans, however, you're dead wrong, as he happily tells you almost every time you click on him in Total War, his
Dead wrong. God, I love PancreasNoWork.
madness is not weakness. The only thing any of his personalities agree on is looting Lizardmen artifacts to find a cure for his condition, which is also something he wanted to do anyways before he went insane. And after this happened to him, he still managed to make himself into such a pain in the ass for the Lizardmen that they have entire prophecies dedicated to dealing with him. Entire armies will be mustered just to fight him, and these aren't small battles either. If he needs to, he'll build up his forces for hundreds of years until he can march into the jungle with enough zombies to trample it beneath him. One of them, in the year 930 IC, required Nakai the Wanderer to show up, and if you're fighting anything less than an apocalypse level battle, he's not showing up. There's also the time he stole the city of Axolotl. I don't mean Luthor Harkon showed up and stole a bunch of important stuff. No, I mean Luthor Harkon rolled up with the endless horde of the undead and stole the city. Everything the Skinks didn't manage to get away in time to prevent him from grabbing it was stolen. It's outright said that not a single stone was left stacked atop another when he was done with it, and he came home a whole lot of magical artifacts richer. He just does this every now and then. Well, he loses every now and then, sure. The Slant can't ultimately do anything about it because he just doesn't have to deal with magic, and the other Lizardmen can chop through all the zombies they want. It doesn't matter. He just goes home to the Vampire Coast and waits for another 100 years for 1,000 new ships to crash and give him a new horde. In the year 1492, when the old world sailed the oceans blue, civilizations like the Empire, Bretonia, and even the Norskins began...
Will you knock it off, please? Knock it off. Stop it. You're knocking stuff over. Nut job?
coming to Lustria in ever greater numbers. And Luthor Harkon is many things, but he's not one to let a chance to grow his power slip away. So with all the knowledge and artifacts he had gained over the years, he created the Ebony Skulls for those who came to the New World with less than pure hearts.
This is what I deal with. Come here, you. Come here. Now, do you mind? There, you're on camera. You happy?
These things are the epitome of a deal with the devil. At any point, the person they're given to can smash them on the ground, and they instantly get not only necromantic powers, but the ability to call on some of Luthor's servants. As a downside, their souls belong to him now. So his forces just kept growing and growing. More ships, more zombies, more vampires and ghouls all joined his ranks. And it's amazing, because in spite of all of this, he is no way a major world power.
1 second, the wife just came in. Sorry about that. It is hot in here today, so there's been requests for me to do something about that.
99% of the time, he's either sitting there in a stupor because his mind is going through another civil war, or he's just bothering random Lizardman cities. But he's been so successful at it that if he decided to invade the Empire or something, he'd probably blitz through it faster than Manfred could ever hope of doing so. Yeah. Speaking of the Empire, he stole a massive cannon called the Queen Bess. There's no special lore for this, it's just a massive gun he looted off an Empire ship. It's a medieval Mac cannon, and he uses it to blow things up. This lore alone makes him more interesting than a solid 50% of the Primarchs. Since he was insane now, he realized he had to put just a bit more power in the hands of people who aren't him, because when he's in one of his less lucid moments, he needs someone to take charge. He ended up getting two main guys to go for with that. One of them is his right-hand man, Captain Drekla. Dracula is an Ailstorm album cover. When you think of the words vampire pirate, this is the guy you think of. He's dumb to the point he can barely think for himself, and wherever Luthor goes, he follows. He's loyal beyond all belief to his captain, and would follow him to the mouth of hell if need be. The other major person Luthor relies on is Black Jens. Black Jens is a cleverer than average ghoul who runs the day-to-day administration of the Vampire Coast when Luthor is having an episode. If the lights aren't on in Luthor's head, Black Jens takes care of the dealing with his vampire admirals and all the other crap that needs to be done. Black Jens is loyal, but every now and then his conscience whispers to him that he should break free from Luthor's control, and those whispers are always getting louder. Spoiler alert, this never happens because we all know how Warhammer Fantasy plotlines end, but it is a cool bit of development for the Vampire Coast. In 2471, close to modern Warhammer Fantasy and 1 year after the birth of our Lord and Savior Karl Franz, he and Morathi briefly worked together against the Lizardmen to steal more of their stuff. Luthor was a bit too greedy though, and unfortunately was too insane to understand that being able to work with Morathi is its own reward, so he argued just a bit too hard for a greater share of the loot. He is still a pirate though, to be fair. You can't blame him that much for it.
Not
Morathi
really.
locked him in one of the treasure vaults for her part, which doesn't seem to have actually amounted to anything because he shows up later. In fact, end times now. Luthor, for his part, has both great moments to shine, as well as what's tied for the most infuriating end to a character during the end times. He shares a very similar fate with a character who dies at the very end of the end times, in fact, for a bit of a spoiler, but we'll get to that soon enough. When Nagash comes back, Luthor pledges his services to him and becomes the Mortarch of the Abyss. Maybe he did it because he saw the writing on the wall and knew that any undead not serving Nagash was going to die an abrupt death. Maybe he thought Nagash could cure him of his condition. Or maybe he was just bored. Luthor Harkon is like an orc. Him doing something because he wants to is a perfectly valid reason. He's an insane vampire pirate. He does what he wants and damn what you think about it. Nagash looked at his massive fleet of ships from every era of history and ordered him to destroy the Tomb King's fleet of Zandri. For anyone else, or even any other faction, this would be a massive undertaking that would almost certainly not be worth the effort. For Luthor Harkon, a man who had spent almost 2,000 years being a pirate and building up his fleet, this was a walk in the park. At the Mortis Delta, where the river Vitae flows into the sea, he crashed his forces into the banks. He lost an entire third of his fleet on the reefs of the shore, and it just didn't matter. A third of infinity gone still leaves infinity left. The Tomb King leading Khemri's navy, King Kalhazar, patiently waited for the catapults he had on hand to tear Luthor's navy apart. But even as the battle between the two navies raged, all of Luthor's ships that had crashed, been sunk or destroyed since the start of the battle were still a problem, because they were filled with zombies. You know how in World War Z, the book, not the movie, zombies could wash across the ocean and start an outbreak that way? That happened. Guided by Dracula, they washed up alongside their vampire commanders, and all poor Kalazar saw was flashes of dark magic and shambling corpses walking up and down the bank. To make matters worse for the Tomb King defenders, Luthor had taken a bunch of salamander bladders to use as makeshift flamethrowers. The Queen Bess was also present, blowing things up as it does. Mac rounds, in fact, were deployed in atmosphere. This was far and away the largest naval battle in Warhammer's history, and while Luthor's fleet was vastly reduced in size, the zombies made it ashore and Hekara's fleet was no more. Luthor even rewarded Dracula with Kalhazar's head as a gift for his excellent service in destroying the Screaming Skull catapults on the shore. Let it never be said that Luthor doesn't treat his crew right. For reference, by the way, even after all of this, he still had 150 ships left over that were properly seaworthy. He had quite the hoarding problem. With the Tomb King's navy destroyed, Luthor decided he might as well plunder Zandri while he was there. He sent Dracula out first, and Dracula had the tremendous misfortune of coming upon Manfred von Karstein, who was running away from Zandri's main army. Dracula and Manfred asked Luthor to get in the fight, which he did, but in his own way. Instead of joining them directly in battle, he got it in his mind that if he killed the Hierophant of the army, the rest of the Tomb Kings would crumble. So he gathered a whole bunch of fell bats, grew bat wings himself because apparently he can just do that, and he just jumped the Hierophant with a bunch of bats. I would like to retract my earlier statement. Luthor Harkon is more interesting than every Primarch's lore. This unfortunately didn't kill the army outright, but the Tomb Kings stopped respawning after that, so it still led to a victory. After that, they went to Khemri to join the main battle. They were a bit late because every step of the way Luthor would halt the entire force to ransack Tomb King structures for loot, which pissed Manfred off, but Luthor will not be denied his pirate booty. They helped cover the flank of the main force from the Tomb King reinforcements when they got there. Honestly, not too much to tell. After that, it's off to Sylvania. Nagash needed people defending his ritual to become death, so he called every undead back to the province. Luthor and Manfred were once again working together, although working together is putting it very generously. Manfred hated Luthor, and Luthor wasn't exactly Manfred's #1 fan either.
I doubt that they would be. Two leaders of very different factions, but unified by the same trait. I don't think they'd be friends.
Shrine to Sigmar and an inn known as the Dead and Buried. Side note, by the way, some bartender in Sylvania had a great sense of humor with that name. Manfred and his forces did battle with Nurgle demons led by a possessed Isabella von Karstein. Also someone known as the Nameless, or Drakenfels if you're an older fantasy fan, but who cares about him? All he did was mix some zombies in with the Nurgle demons, don't worry about him. Manfred held the brunt of the forces at bay, and once he fully committed to fighting the demons, Harkon's own force attacked from the flank. Now on paper, this might seem like all is well and good for the undead. Do remember, however, that Luthor is not much of a mage. He's not a mage at all, in fact, and while he can still resurrect corpses, he's not quite as good at it as someone like Manfred. So his forces weren't as effective at this point, especially because Sylvania is a landlocked province and he can't just rely on the Queen Bess blowing people up from offshore. Beasts of Nurgle kept plowing into Luthor's lines, making things even worse for the pirate. For his part, he had one of the angrier personalities take over and he charged headfirst into the fray. Do you know how Manfred reacted to this? Guess, viewer, what do you think Manfred did in response to seeing an ally of his start fighting? Did you
He's gonna run away because Manfred's a dick.
say weaken the bindings keeping Luthor's army together? Because if you did, you're right, while they're fighting demons no less. This let some of the beasts of Nurgle pounce on Luthor, which wasn't enough to kill him, but it was still a colossal dick move. Manfred then retreated to the Dead and Buried Inn, murdering one of Luthor's vampire admirals to heal his dread abyssal mount. Luthor had slipped in unnoticed while Manfred did this and nearly slit his throat with his cutlass, but Vlad showed up with reinforcements and just barely managed to calm everyone down. Luthor was glad Vlad had showed up to take care of Manfred and was privately happy for it, because even though he really wanted to kill Manfred, he knew Manfred's a slippery little bastard and would probably find a way to turn the tables. Or I was misreading what happened and he didn't want to piss off Vlad by killing Manfred. That one sounds a lot cooler, so let's go with that. Theoretically choosing to help Manfred defend the courtyard of the inn, Luthor and Dracula stood at the opposite side of it to be as far from the slimy weasel as possible. Once the fighting resumed, Luthor was all over the place. He not only flew back into proper madness, but it was so bad that he was either speaking in pirate speak or was just completely unintelligible. He'd be swinging left and right, butchering zombies and unclean ones, constantly going, yar, avast. Dracula had to keep yanking him back to prevent him from jumping into the Horde, and at this point, I'm fully confident Luthor's mind was actually put back together briefly, and every personality just wanted to kill. A great unclean one burst through the lines and started smashing what was left of the undead forces, and Luthor simply looked at it and tried to 1v1 it. Dracula pulled him out of the great unclean one's way and saved his life one last time at the cost of his own, being smashed flat by the demon's weapon. Everyone, pour out your finest of ales for Dracula. May we all be so lucky to have a first mate as dedicated as he. Manfred, for his part, jumped at the opportunity given and helped finish off the great unclean one, sealing its essence to fully heal his mount so he can make a break for it. Having gone back to being as sane as he possibly can, Luthor also went to join Manfred on his steed to get out. But unfortunately, everyone, Luthor Harkon made the greatest mistake a Warhammer character could ever make, trusting Manfred to not be the absolute worst. And so, because Manfred von Karstein is Manfred von Karstein and cannot do anything without being the single greatest dickhead in the franchise, eclipsing even Erebus by a factor of 10, Manfred got Luthor killed. Luthor had grabbed onto Manfred's mount, and Manfred cut his arm off at the elbow, so Luthor plunged back into the mass of plague bearers and zombies.
There you go.
Thank you, Manfred. What reason did he have for doing this? Oh, he just
Because he's a dick. What other reason is there?
didn't much like Luthor Harkon, wasn't a fan, didn't like the cut of his jib. Also, no, I don't know why Luthor didn't sprout bat wings again and fly away. End times. Down an arm, his army, and first mate, and now with a broken leg from the fall, you would think that Luthor Harkon would die now. And while his end is soon, it doesn't come from the infinite horde around him. Because all he does is get somehow even angrier, like Angron levels of sheer unrelenting rage, and starts swearing at every single being that approaches him to finish what Manfred started. A zombie takes a swing at him, it dies. A plague bearer walks up, it dies. Dozens of plague bearers all at once? Congratulations, Nurgle, a whole bunch of your demons are showing back up to your garden a little bit earlier than they were supposed to. He's swearing like a pirate, he's cutting things up left and right, making Davy Jones and Manon and whatever ocean being you can imagine weep tears of pure joy when finally at last Isabella shows up. She disarms him, again very literally, and gets a bunch of plague bearers to hold him down. She whispers some wheat nothings to him, and he melts into soup. Despite him supposedly being immune to magic, that was the end of Luthor Harkon. On paper, it took an endless horde of demons to finally bring the Pirate King down. But in reality, he just got Manfred von Karstein. Thank you, Manfred. Very cool, Manfred. I hope your genitals explode, Manfred. But thankfully, Creative Assembly came through where GW failed, because while Luthor Harkon and his vampire zombie pirates were briefly playable on the tabletop, Total War has given them unlife like never before. They have a theme song now. So for fun, let's end on Do or Don't Luthor Harkon for Total War. And I'm gonna be honest, this will be the shortest lore positive section ever, but not because I think he doesn't have a lot of things going for him. He has solid goals that are very achievable, because stealing Lizardman stuff and loot in general is really all he wants. He's a pretty powerful character in lore who keeps on kicking, both because of his inherent anti-magical ability, because he's a vampire pirate king, and because he's the luckiest man on the planet who gets entire armies delivered for free due to the ocean. But you know what? His ultimate lore positive is that he is a vampire pirate emperor. And if the words vampire pirate emperor don't instantly sell you on this character's lore, I don't want to talk to you. There's nothing I can say that will sell you on Luthor Harkon, and quite frankly, the only thing I want to sell you on is the idea that you need therapy if you don't think that's the coolest shit ever.
Frankly, you don't need to say anything, Pat. Like, when I read the title of this, I was like, whoever he's talking about from Warhammer Fantasy is going to be an absolute boss.
Vampire Pirate Emperor doesn't make you want to chug a bottle of rum and start singing sea shanties? You're dead inside. Worse than dead inside, actually, because Luthor's a vampire and he's pretty clearly having fun. So for gameplay positives, let's go over his faction specialty stuff first. Luthor gets a massive diplomatic relations bonus with Harkon the Black, which is quite nice. Not spectacular, granted, but it's a fun nod to the fact that he was a Mortarch under Nagash, and Harkon usually sticks around, at least during my campaigns. He gives all lords and embedded heroes 6+ to melee defense, nothing spectacular again, but it's a solid bonus. It's nothing you're going to be writing home about, but it can be the difference between a lord clutching out a win and going home in a body bag. And one of his skills you can unlock gives you +1 to both capacity and recruit rank of vampire fleet captains, which isn't great, but it's there. It helps. For in-battle gameplay, he's certainly got some more positives. His army automatically gets 25% spell resistance, so if you happen to be fighting Tzeentch or Aslan, you can safely tell them to get bent. He also gives an additional 3 points to vampire corruption in a province per turn. Very nice, considering you very much need that. And when fighting Lizardmen, you get +8 leadership on all your units. Do as Luthor does, and go steal Lizardman shit. You can also get Drekla as a follower, unfortunately not a legendary hero, but he does buff your army, so he's still hanging around giving his captain his support. His unique skills, in all honesty, aren't super interesting, but they are the sort of thing that makes a solid and reliable army and character. His skills can give him Frenzy, increase his melee defense and armor, lower his army's upkeep by 10%, and not only give himself exploding ammunition, but also increase the missile strength of zombie gunnery units. Only by 8%, which might sound rather underwhelming, especially considering that a lot of those gunnery units are rather low tier. But remember, when you're playing the Vampire Coast, you weren't really playing Total Warhammer 3. You're playing Empire Total War 2, complete with naval battles, only this time the ships are so eager that they walk onto the land themselves to get in on the fun.
That is this. When I actually saw somebody doing a playthrough where the only unit they built was the walking ships. And I thought that was so metal that it just was beyond description, okay? You have these gargantuan ships walking around the battlefield shooting hand cannons. What are you going to do against that? You're just going to sit there and die.
Low-tier units, especially when buffed, are a ranged hellscape for your enemy, and Luthor makes them stronger. And to top it off, he gets a dragon mount at level 18. A Deathshriek Terrorgeist if you want to be technical about it, but come on, it's a dragon. Mounted on it, Luthor can turn infantry blobs into slurry, turn weaker characters into slurry, and if there's anyone that could potentially give him trouble in melee, he can just fly away and shoot at them with a gun. In terms of being super ultra competitive, I'm not going to speak on how well he is. In terms of just playing single player, once you level up Mr. Harkon, he's going to be killing most things you throw him at. You can also restore him to lucidity and give him access to the lore of the deep as the game goes on. This turns someone who's already pretty great at ranged and melee combat into a wizard who can cast one of the most damage-filled spell lores in the game. He can also summon giant crabs with it, as well as slightly buff range units with a spell. To put it bluntly, he turns into a monster. Unfortunately, his dialogue and animations don't change, so he still looks and sounds insane, but I like to imagine that from that point on, he's just doing it to mess with people. For his lore downsides, no. I'm not giving lore downsides this video. Vampire Pirate Emperor. You will instantly know from that description alone if you have any passing interest in Luthor Harkon's lore. Aside from that, the only downside I can give the man is that he is yet another direct victim of Manfred von Karstein during the end times. So I guess you have to live with that knowledge when you're playing as him. For gameplay downsides though, picking him as your starting legendary lord means you begin with a massive relations penalty for the Lizardmen. Given you want to be fighting them, this isn't too much of a downside, but you better be ready for war the moment you find a new Lizard faction. They'll be declaring it soon enough if you don't. He also starts in Lustria, having remained on the Vampire Coast unlike Teclis, who took the first chance he had to get the hell out. Now the Southlands where Teclis moves seems to be the Warhammer 3 Thunderdome, presumably because wherever Teclis goes, violence follows. Just because the Southlands is now worse doesn't mean Lustria is pleasant. There's still most of the Lizardmen, who especially hate you, the Skaven, Marcus Wolfheart, and Ulthuan isn't far away either. Cathayans have also decided they want to come for a visit because the Jade Dragon has nothing better to do than beat up random people in the jungle, and if you're playing with Mixu's Legendary Lords mod like I usually do, there's multiple Demon Legendary Lords kicking about too. You are going to have your work cut out for you. For battlefield downsides, he doesn't get his Terrorgeist mount until level 18. Until then, he has to footslog. Similarly, you need to fix his brain first before you can be allowed to cast spells with him. And speaking of that, every now and again one of his personalities takes over and changes his traits around. Each time this happens, he gets bonuses in one area and minuses in another. So he may be great at melee attacks one turn, but he can also suffer from rampage. The next his ranged attacks are stronger, but his leadership takes a nosedive. On the plus side, this can randomly let you cast a Lore of the Deep spell before you fix him, but that is by no means something you should rely on. The trait can change at the drop of a hat, and then your carefully constructed battle plan can fall apart if you base it around him having that spell at that moment. And for the last of his gameplay downsides, he really doesn't do anything to buff his faction, or even his own troops. If you aren't fighting Lizardmen, I think the only thing he gives is his army 25% spell resistance and buffing gunnery units. Those are nice, but Luthor is first and foremost a combat lord. You want him tearing things apart at range or up close. If you prefer lords who are more buff wagon than murder machine, you might want to look elsewhere. And there's Luthor Harkon. Given his end times lore and how potentially difficult his Total War campaign can be, you might think he's the worst pirate you've ever heard of. But even so, at least now you've definitely heard of him. I held myself off for this entire video to say that. I think I've earned it. Thank you as always to my wonderful channel members. You are the insanity to my Luthor Harkon.
You quite did. You have earned it, my friend. Here we go. Whoop. Let's get back up. Yep. There we go. Okay, great. Yep. Okay.
Please, CA, just add the shanty to the game. I will pay for it at this point. Make it a music pack or something. Just record a couple more and sell it for 15 bucks. I promise you people would buy it. Yeah, they'll absolutely complain, but if you think that most Warhammer fans won't spend the money to add sea shanties to the game, you're more insane than Harkon is.
You cannot play a pirate lore without sea shanties, and I don't care what you do. I don't care what you say or what you do. If you're playing without sea shanties, you're doing it wrong. My computer is really making some noise right now. It is not appreciative of what I do. It doesn't like me at all. My cat, ow. Do you have to do that? Really? Yeah, meow. Alright. Warpugs. Luthor Harkon. Another victim of Karstein. And frankly, I played Karstein once in Warhammer 2, and I never wanted to play him again because he sounds like an asshole. I'm going to head out from here. Be sure to check all the links in the description for all of PancreasNoWork, all of his links. I'm surprised he didn't mention a few things when he mentioned Morathi. Because Morathi is, well, Morathi is Morathi. What else is there to say? I mean, there's really nothing. Cat! I swear! I recorded earlier today. I started trying to record again, and this is what happens to me. I just turn into complete salad. Everything's falling apart. I'm losing my mind, and, yeah. My cat won't stop jumping on the table. I'm going to take off from here. I hope you guys have a great day, and I'll catch you guys next time. Be sure to check all the links in the description, leave a comment, subscribe to both me and PancreasNoWork. And it's time to go get this place cooled down because it is a furnace in here right now.